welcome back to the Kingsway Podcast.
Welcome.
I'm glad you are here. Doing another Sunday study hall.
Yeah, this is going to be our last one for a while because we are at church wrapping up the Gospel of Matthew for now.
This
is our third chunk of 4, I think.
Yep.
We make it about 7
We are not
chapters
doing
every
5
time.
chunks. We're doing 4 chunks. And so I think this is actually almost a year and a half, 2 years into
something like
walking through Matthew. I know it's been quite a while. We're finishing up chapter 22, and this is verses 23 through 46, I believe.
So when we get back to it in like 3 years, no, I'm kidding. I don't know when.
I think we're going to try to finish at the beginning of next year.
Yeah.
Into Easter.
When we get back to it.
Don't hold me to that, though.
It would be cool, though. When we get back, we'll be starting at 23 and going all the way through the end into 28.
Yes. And I think, what's crazy is there's like the first 18 or 19 chapters are like the first 2 and like 3/4 years of Jesus's ministry. And then the last like 6 to 8 chapters are a week.
Yeah. We've gone 2.9 years and like through Monday.
Yep.
And the next 5, 6, 7 chapters are going to be 5 days.
Yep. And that just
maybe
goes
a little
to show
longer
you
after the resurrection.
It's like what they call it, Passion Week. Is that right? Yeah. So they call it Passion Week, and it's from the triumphal entry into Jerusalem into the crucifixion at Golgotha, and then his resurrection, and then final ascension. So kind of crazy. It'll be fun to come back into because we come back into the woe of the Pharisees, and he comes out swinging.
Yeah. It's going to be really interesting, that whole section. Hit the woes of the scribes and Pharisees. If you're under 18, that joke is probably funny. But over 15. It's a small window.
The small window, yeah. And if you're not on YouTube, it's not funny at all because you couldn't see what I was doing. It's a dance move. Whoa.
Yep.
This section that we're talking about today, I'm particularly excited about because there are some things that I wanted to talk about more and clarify a little bit on that I didn't get to necessarily do. We got like 7 brides for 7 brothers in here, and there's some fun stuff with afterlife and what the afterlife will be like, and then into even Jesus like basically like boiling down the entire Old Testament and everything that's taught in the Torah into like 2 sentences, which is just like the Harvard says the simpler you can say something complex, the higher your intelligence. And I'm like, this is like God just being like, I'm like really smart. So, which is really cool. And then obviously Jesus talking about why his authority and why his wisdom isn't something that we've seen before, but actually speaks to something greater, deeper, with more authority. So great section, fun to study. I know we've got some new listeners and people that are on the journey. And some of these grinders have been like discovering our podcast, either from our church or online. And then they are like on the journey. Like someone literally stopped both of us yesterday and said they're starting at 1 on our podcast.
And I'm so sorry.
That was before you even here, dude. You can't you can't apologize.
I can apologize because I've watched a couple of them. That was a growth year.
Oh,
that was a building year.
Here's the thing. When we started it, Jed Moody, I love you so much. Because I looked at Jed and I said, Jed, we're going to make every mistake while we do it. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah.
We're just going to make every mistake while we do it.
And that's why I said building year and not bad. Because it's like, let's start figuring out how to do this while doing it.
And he was a lot like you, that like he would listen to it and be like, we can do better. Like, and, like he's like, and like he would not settle, and like he'd want it to be better and better. And for me, being in front of a camera and talking without a crowd was so new. I had not done it very much. And talking in front of a camera with a microphone with no audience, harder for me. If I'm being honest, a different muscle. And so I had moments where like words didn't flow as easily. I felt like I couldn't remember my train of thought. It was just a different time. But arguably some of our most fun content was in those first couple years. And even some of the later content we did was in response to things that had changed, so cool. Anyway,
absolutely.
If you're along for the ride, I'm glad. And I think you're going to enjoy this episode of Sunday Study Hall. Let me pull up my notes so I can once again fail
Yes.
It's an incredibly difficult task.
This is the part of the episode where we summarize the sermon in 90 seconds. Because we've already talked about this passage during the sermon. So we just want to get everybody up to speed and then keep talking from that point. So I have my 90-second, minute, 30-second timer right here. You ready?
Yeah, I'm ready.
3, 2, 1, go.
3 different sections in this particular part of Matthew 22. The first is the Sadducees come and they test Jesus with a question that would help prove their theology. A couple dies. The brother of the wife that died takes this wife in, and then subsequently the 6 other brothers die. So then the 7th, and so then this question arises: whose wife would she be in the afterlife? And Jesus basically says, earthly covenants don't transfer to the eternal, and you're idiots. And then basically goes on to basically tell them, you have an error in the way you're thinking. You even teach that God is present with Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac. So you're talking in present tense. So God is not the God of the dead. He's the God of the living. And drop the mic. And so then the Pharisees see their moment as the Sadducees walk away defeated. The Pharisees step up and they ask their hard question, which is the most important commandment? And Jesus comes in, quotes the one that they're assuming, which is the Shema, but then attaches, like kind of leafs in the second one, which is love your neighbors yourself, which then equates the quality of our love for our neighbor, shows the quality of our love for God. And then as if the Pharisees can't respond, Jesus comes in and basically goes, and the reason I can teach both of these things with authority is because I'm not just the son of David, I'm the son of God. I'm actually your Lord. And ends with the whole section of them never testing him again. And we are called to do the same thing, to make Jesus not just a good teacher, but the Lord of our life. Boom! That might be my
That
best
was like
one.
the first one that hit it right on the money.
Oh my goodness! I was
You
way
can't
too
say anything
excited.
else.
I was way
That's
too
it.
excited.
That was good. Yeah. No, it's that's the thing I've really loved about studying the Gospel of Matthew with you, with the teaching team slowly, is like how some of these sections link, because I think we mentioned on the podcast before, I sort of tongue in cheek have a hard time with the book of Proverbs because I feel like 31 chapters of one sentence fortune cookie, whatever. That's unfair.
Oh, please, somebody make fortune cookies with Proverbs.
Proverb
Please,
cookies?
Proverb cookies. Oh my gosh, it needs to happen.
But it feels so disjointed to me. I know that there is actually sort of a flow of some of the Proverbs,
Hold
like
on,
chapters
pause.
1
That's
through
a
7.
real thing. We need to make that, Ryan. Has no
Proverb
one made
cookies?
that? Has someone made Proverb cookies? It's a real thing.
The Lord is calling you, listener.
Hobby Lobby would.
If you are gifted in the culinary arts,
just saying. All right, keep
we will
going.
print out the Proverbs in King James, and
My whole
one by
whole
one.
brain just got like just totally hijacked
Goodbye.
by that thought. Okay, keep going. Tongue in cheek.
So, tongue in cheek, I've talked about how I have a problem with the book of Proverbs because it's so short, and none of them are promises. All of them are like,
This would be a good idea.
it'd be nice if you did this. And some of the others are like, it'd be nice if you did something different. And it's just like so monotonous, whatever. At times with Matthew, which is one of the longest gospel accounts, it's been like story after story after story after story after story. And at some point you're like, is this going anywhere?
Yep.
And then it's the last week and you're like, whoa.
Yep.
What I've loved is that we can like go through this slowly and sometimes connect bigger
themes.
bigger swatches of the
Yep.
gospel. And I feel like the way you connected these 3 made a lot of sense. Now it connects to a bunch more before. This Jesus, like Neo from the Matrix fighting all of the Mr. Smiths. Sorry about that 2001 reference, but it's like him like doing some downloaded kung fu to fight off 14,000 questions 4 days before he's going to be crucified and die for the sins of humanity.
Absolutely.
So these are some of the last ones in a row.
And they're like the final bosses.
Yeah.
Like they're like, this is the last
The
Sadducees
ones before are all
question.
difficult too. But
Yes. But it's like you're fighting off every deep polarizing issue and theology issue that all these different sects of religious groups have, all these different divisions of thought and theology and philosophy, and they're all coming in guns blazing with their biggest questions. And I love that, I said this on Sunday, but their questions are always two-pronged. They're trying to trick Jesus, but also prove themselves right.
Yeah.
And they're trying to hijack that authority. by proving themselves to have the higher understanding. And Jesus just, I mean, like Mr. Miyagi, like just Yoda's the snot out of them, like every time.
I feel like if Jesus had fun answering all these questions, he would have had a blast at the junior high camp I just went to. There were some questions that were worded in such a way to just be as like
difficult
as like difficult as possible. So one was like, a kid started with, "We all know the Bible's unbelievable," and not like unbelievable, like, whoa, that's cool, like not believable. I was like, you're at a church camp, bub. Like you're starting with, "We all know." I hate when people do that. But it'd be like that. So like, how can we trust it? Or like, how can know which books are in the Bible and which ones? They're coming up with some Gospel of Thomas questions like at 11 years old. And I'm like, you don't even know what you're talking about. You just know that it's fiery. And so you're just throwing this grenade in here. Like, how can this unpaid junior high volunteer,
which is it's so how these sections go. It's wild. The Pharisees and the Sadducees are like the Republican Democrats of the time of these Jewish, like, and so they don't get along. They have the same nation at the center of them,
but their idea of that nation is so different.
Very different.
We may have talked about the Pharisees and Sadducees before.
Yeah,
I can't tell if I'm talking really fast or not because I drank this.
You just smoked that no. I saw you.
But the Pharisees are the more low class. I mean like blue collar.
Yeah,
that's what I mean.
Collar.
They're the more blue collar, grassroots, righteousness focused ones. The Sadducees are the aristocratic, high class, white collar.
It would be like Amish or like
Amish and Mennonite.
A little bit more like Mennonite, maybe Mennonite, where like there's some things that they step into more of the modern world, but they only recognize like the first 5 books of the Torah. They live very religious, very liturgical lifestyles. But
they also deny a bunch of progressive ideas. So actually the conservative blue-collar Pharisees are the progressives in here, where they're saying, no, we don't just think Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy are authoritative. We think all 37 plus books in the Old Testament are authoritative. And because of that, so I was just reading a note in here because I was gone this past week during the week. So I didn't get to sit with them during the preaching.
It was just me and Mark, and we killed it.
Yep. It was the best one. Cut off all the chaff and whatever. But I was just reading a note about how they only believed in the first 5 books, the Sadducees. So they don't believe in the resurrection. They also don't believe in angels.
Ooh.
So when Jesus at the end is like, you'll be like angels in heaven, that's just like an extra knife in the gut of...
Because you haven't read the rest of the stuff. Like you don't know all of it.
You're denying all this other stuff.
Which is why when the Pharisees ask their question and he says all the law and the prophets.
Yeah.
Because that would have been the thing that they would have been like, oh, and the prophets?
Yeah.
See, they thought they had secret knowledge that the Sadducees didn't have access to because they believed in the prophets as well, which is why they had all that extra rules and extra things that they followed as a progressive. But it is, you're so right that the Sadducees are kind of the blue collar grassroots, like
the Pharisees.
The Pharisees are, I meant, and the Sadducees come in with like they're restrictive, only 5 books. This is all we believe. We don't believe all this other stuff. This isn't what is in, and because of that, there's just a lot of conversations about what's important and what's not.
Yeah,
and there's a lot of ways of like how is God. What is God pleased with, and what is God not pleased with? What's important to obey? What's not important to obey?
So this, you know what this feels like? I'm going to bring up something so fiery and hot button, and if you're listening, I want you to know that I'm using this strictly as a like explainer of what's happening. In this passage about.
Oh, I'm ready now.
So the Sadducees lay out this story. So a man marries a woman, he dies. And his brother marries her to take care of her. He dies. His brother marries her to take care of her. And 7 brothers end up marrying this lady, and they die, and then she dies. Who is she married to in heaven? You know what that sounds like is a like tree-hugging liberal pacifist saying, okay, a good guy with a gun is the only thing that can stop a bad guy with a gun. So a bad guy with a gun walks in and a good guy with a gun shoots him. Well, killing is wrong. So then that guy's a bad guy with a gun. Then a good guy with a gun sees that guy who shot the other guy and shoots him. Then that guy's dead. This guy killed him, so he's a bad guy. Then it feels like that, where you're like, you're like trying, the point of it isn't to say, aren't we sad that all these people died?
Yep.
It's to say, look how silly you are. You,
Yep.
Anyway.
And it's the whole point of the passage is trying to make resurrection look ridiculous.
Yeah.
That's what it's, the whole point.
You have
is
this
just,
hope in this false thing, according to the Sadducees.
You know, the Sadducees are going like, why would you believe in this thing that obviously is way too complicated to believe in? There's no way this would work out. And everybody would be frustrated and angry, and all the relationships would be so broken, and nothing makes sense if there's a resurrection. And Jesus, in just the most Jesus way, is like, you are a toddler using temporary small perspectives and small understandings to try to explain huge eternal things.
Yeah.
And I can't even tell you how wrong you are. In fact, let me tell you how wrong you are by your own teaching style. You talk about Abraham as God of Abraham, God of Jacob, God of Isaac. You realize he's the God of those people. That is not, he was. You teach it as he is. Why? It's because he still is the God of, and so he's trying to show us, like, you already talk about this as if there's a resurrection. Like,
and to be fair, the first 5 books of the Old Testament talk about it exactly that way.
Yep.
He is.
Yep.
And so they're still following only their scriptures. They're not secretly also thinking the others are authoritative. Jesus is just showing them. This is like the same argument. I've watched a bunch of those street apologist, college campus apologist guys, and they're like, yeah, Jesus never says he's God. And then they'll be like, okay, how about these 17 examples where he says something so close to I'm God in our limited historical context understanding, but they understand it and they pick up stones to kill him for blasphemy.
Yep.
So if they did that, he must have claimed to be God. Yep. Like,
well,
don't you see? So it's like, yes, it's literally true. He isn't like, I'm God, welcome. But so Jesus doing that same thing.
Because he does it at the very end of the section.
Yeah.
He does it at the very end of the section. He does the same thing where he's like trying to get them to say it, and they won't say it. And he's like, yeah, well, there you go. So I love this because then the Pharisees walk away, and you can tell they're devastated because not only did he tell them, which I didn't mention on Sunday, that angels do exist.
Yeah.
And that you're going to be like them. But then also he basically walked away saying, like, you've been preaching there's a resurrection this whole time. I'm not ignoring your own teachings.
Yeah.
I'm the God of the living and not the God of the dead. And so they went away Sadducee because that broke all their theology.
Nice.
But then the Pharisees, as if they smell blood in the water of like, sweet, now we were right. We knew there was a resurrection. Jesus just proved that we were right. Let's step in and ask him to see if we knew what was ultimately right. And here's the fun thing that I didn't mention on Sunday. The Pharisees wanted Jesus to say the first part of this because they believed loving God then allowed them to justify a lot of actions that minimized, hurt, marginalized, or pushed people down and allowed themselves to feel more righteous.
Yeah.
And so they were really excited when he started with the Shema, because that would have just been a weaponized version of love in order to move forward their agenda. And so Jesus plays straight into their hands by allowing this idea, which it says an expert of the law from the Pharisees comes up and goes, what is the greatest commandment? Jesus says the Shema, which is from Deuteronomy 6, 2-4. And he says, hear, O Israel, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. And I don't know how long that pause was. I hope he paused just long enough so that the Pharisees were like the gleam, like got in their eyes, and they like got excited, or like, you know what I mean? Or like, but then he goes, and the second is like it. And the second is love your neighbor as yourself. These sum up all the law and the prophets. Now, when he attached that second one to the Shema, I don't know how else to say it. Like, that is a pinnacle moment in his kingship, in his ministry. This is something that he has alluded to in the Sermon on the Mount, talked about in other passages in Matthew, but never been asked and given an opportunity to clearly say, this is all that's important. If you really want to boil it down, you need to take this and move it in. And part of the way I explained on Sunday I really liked was just like he is basically equating the quality of your love towards your neighbor will reveal the quality of your love towards God. And you cannot separate them. You cannot remove them. You cannot, the way I think about it with me is I cannot say I love my wife while not loving our children. Like I cannot say I love my parents without loving my siblings and my wife. Like she would say, no, like if you love me, love those closest to you. Like love the things that I love. Like be loyal and loving to the things that are closest. Like, and we know that intuitively. Like I can't separate those two relationships without it causing a weak form of love towards one or the other, or B, it doesn't separate. Like if I just look at Katrina and I say, I love you so much, but she's like, but you clearly don't love our kids. Like that love diminishes or even dissipates completely. And the way that Jesus does that is just, you want to talk about, twisting the knife with the angel theology, twisting the knife with the resurrection theology. This would have been, oh man, I hope this isn't true. Because if this is true, the Pharisees are bad. This is not good because they have not been loving people well. They've been using this idea of loving God as a scapegoat to hurt, steal.
Their idea of loving God includes loving the right people and hating the right people.
Yep.
But what Jesus says is not love the right people, but love your neighbor as yourself. And I think you pointed this out in your sermon, is that like, who are their neighbors? They're devout Jewish neighbors. They're devout religious neighbors who are following God to the best of their ability. They're neighbors with leprosy, who are unclean and cannot be in the city. They're neighbors who are the occupying Roman military, okay, I can't remember this, and somebody in the comments can fact check me. Somebody during the Maccabean revolt, I don't remember if it was the Romans or the Greeks, but I think it was the Greeks, but then the Romans are just the same in their mind. Like they also speak Greek.
Yeah.
They worship all the same pantheon of gods, whatever. In the Maccabean revolt, in which Israel became an occupied territory where they lost and are now slaves in their own homes to Rome or Greece or whoever actually did the fighting at that moment, they finished the Maccabean revolt at the temple in Jerusalem.
Yep.
So they're fighting for their homeland. They're fighting for whatever. The enemy forces, whether Greece or Rome, can't make it into the temple. They're fighting too hard. And then they think, the Jews won't fight on the Sabbath. We'll wait for the Sabbath, and then we'll storm in, and they can't fight back against us or they'll be breaking their own religious code. So they stormed in on the Sabbath and killed all the remaining Jewish forces and then made sacrifices in the temple with pigs and unclean animals.
Yep.
I'm assuming not to Yahweh, but to other to other deities, to false gods, lesser gods, whatever. That is the image they have in their head. And honestly, the image that is on some or very similar images on some Roman coinage where we have George Washington on our quarters.
Yep.
They have a pig being sacrificed in the temple or similar things about the Jews being crushed and Yahweh being shamed. They have similar things all over in inscriptions and whatever.
Oh, yeah.
On their coins, on the things that they're using. That's what they thought of the Romans. So not only are they mean, they're evil, they're short-tempered, and they are quick to put the hurt down on us. And they dishonored God in a way similar. So if sacrificing a pig in the temple is bad, like God struck down a guy for just touching the Ark of the Covenant once. How does God think about the Romans if they sacrificed a pig in the temple? He must be seething and just holding back some giant, dreadful, tremendous, and I should be on God's side and hate them too.
Yep.
And when Jesus says this, he's saying the opposite.
Yep.
What does he do when he goes into Jerusalem in his final week? That's a triumphal entry and then clears out the court of the Gentiles, where the Gentiles, like the Romans, can come to worship Yahweh. So Jesus is saying the opposite of what they think is a godly thing, which is, I should hate the Romans and be on God's side by doing that.
Which I don't want to pull the curtain back too much on the ending in the sense of like, but you get a little sneak peek, and because it's going to be so long before we preach any further, you'll probably forget it by then anyways.
I'll forget it too.
But the thought process behind this is, how does Jesus go from in 1 week by being Hosanna save us to crucify him?
Mm-hmm.
And this is how it starts to happen.
Yeah.
He doesn't say, love the Lord your God with all your heart and kill the infidel, kill all those that do not agree with that.
I feel like Jesus was a walking "he gets us" ad,
Mm-hmm.
like from the Super Bowl, how people were like up in arms because there was somebody washing feet in front of an abortion clinic and somebody washing feet of somebody else that you assume is LGBTQ identified based on the images. And just the pictorial assumption that you could serve and love and want the best for people from the groups that you oppose their ideology and what they think is a good idea of human flourishing. Just because there's a picture of them being blessed by people who look like you, you're up in arms. And Jesus is over here saying, love your Roman neighbors.
Yep.
Yeah, they're going to kill them.
Well, and just a chapter earlier, not even, Jesus is teaching on this banquet idea, and the banquet is for those that are good and bad.
Yeah,
and
explicitly
says that word for word, and they're invited. And I feel like it's to the Pharisees. And I feel like this is just Jesus coming back to that and making sure they heard him.
Yeah.
Like, love your neighbors. The good and the bad.
Okay, I'm going to point out two funny, ironic, or whatever things about Jesus saying these two commandments. So, love the Lord your God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That adds a word from the Hebrew of Deuteronomy 6, but it doesn't really add an idea because the Greeks and Greek language just kind of separated out.
It's Hebrew to Greek, so it's just a little
mind
different.
And soul in the Jews' language and in Hebrew, it was kind of the same thing. Your ideas, your passions,
soul was so much more than just like external. Yeah.
Or Greeks had a lot of baggage, so they separated that out into two words. It seems common and not like Jesus doing anything crazy there.
No.
I haven't checked the Septuagint to see if it also says soul and mind along with body and strength.
When I remember learning about the Shema just has more words that mean more. And so Greek just lays it out. Yeah.
Anyway, so what was I going to say about that?
Two things about this.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So Jesus knows Deuteronomy super well.
Yep.
We can make arguments about how well he knows the whole Old Testament, but if Matthew 4 is correct, that he fights off the devil while starving with the book of Deuteronomy from memory, he must love Deuteronomy a lot.
Yep.
He exclusively quotes Deuteronomy to be like, no, you're wrong, the devil, because God also says yada, yada, yada.
Yep.
Not yada. I'm sorry if that was sacrilegious. But I mean, that's how quickly...
Man does not live on bread alone, but on the very word of God.
That's how quickly he recites Deuteronomy. So he must love it. So he says the most important commandment is Deuteronomy 6, the Shema, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, which is in the Torah.
Yep.
There you go, Sadducees. And the second is like it, not in the Torah. So first of all, another knife to the Sadducees. They're just over there getting kicked in the stomach while lying on the ground wheezing, metaphorically. But then the context of Deuteronomy 6 is all sort of violent. They make it, I don't know how explicit Deuteronomy is about them leaving Egypt. It didn't seem to be super explicit. They're just kind of walking, and then they get to a place and do the 10 Commandments. It's not clear that it's not Egypt, but it's not clear that it is. So they're just kind of walking. They do the 10 Commandments in chapter 5. Chapter 4, they fight King Og or something. They defeat some king and his nation. 10 Commandments. The Shema. Okay, the Lord's going to drive out all these other people. So even in Deuteronomy, the Shema is surrounded by, I'm gonna kick out all these people from their land. We're gonna hurt people, and it's good that we're hurting people because they were gonna hurt us and whatever. So Jesus goes, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then leaves Deuteronomy and all the violence and all the stuff around it, and jumps to, where is love your neighbor as yourself? Is it? I'm gonna need to remind myself. It's either in an obscure Leviticus verse, which then, okay, maybe it's in the Torah again.
Maybe.
Which would make the Sadducees happy. I need to remind myself.
I don't remember where that's at.
And the second is like it,
I'm looking.
which is, that is verse 40.
40, yeah.
Yeah.
Leviticus 19.
Yeah, okay, so they both are in the Torah. So the Sadducees should be able to agree with this too. Anyway, but then he goes to the middle of Leviticus, which is kind of expounding on the same story of giving rules and laws and whatever, in the middle of how you treat each other well. It's also the same chapter with that people have the tattoos verse. Don't have any markings or cut your body or whatever, which if you're interested in what God thinks about tattoos and that whole thing, one of my favorite podcasts we've ever done is the Tattoos podcast, and I'm going to try to link that to this.
You should definitely go link to that.
Still to this day, I get giddy thinking about how well that went.
Dude, it was good.
And it's that if you have tattoos, you're a sinner. No, I'm just kidding. That's a joke. That's a joke. Anyway, but
well, and see, I didn't even attach Leviticus to this sermon.
Yeah.
And one of the things I talked about was it's such an obscure passage that nobody would have been expecting it.
Yeah.
Like they would have been turning away thinking,
he's done.
We're done. That's it. And then to attach this, one of the things that I had read about the Pharisees is that they neglected love as the motivation for treating your neighbors. Your love was only for God and your devotion to God. So therefore, to be devoted to God, you just did what was right.
Yeah.
Not necessarily because you love your neighbor. You just love God. And then you're like, I guess because I love him, I'll do this.
Yeah.
So you begrudgingly, because your mom told you to.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
What's so funny? So this passage in Leviticus is in the middle of Leviticus, and it's talking about how to get along with your neighbors and how do you become a cohesive community after Egypt? How do you not bring your Egypt morals into this new godly community? So he leaves the idea of the context of that Deuteronomy 6 passage of we need to kick out the outsiders and goes to Leviticus with how do we treat those in proximity to us? How do we treat the insiders as if we're all insiders?
Yep. That's wild.
Anyway,
I love it.
Big jump.
I love it because most of the rules that the Pharisees have put in place that were not biblical laws, but that were just rules to keep us from breaking biblical Old Testament rules or Jewish laws. Almost, I think what I looked up is like there was so few that met this context that it was wild.
Yeah.
They did not have this on their radar at all.
Here's one other thing I'm going to throw out. I don't know about this topic as well as I wish I did, but it's worth thinking about. And if you guys think, I've never heard that before, I'd like to hear more about it, please let us know in the comments or email me, ryan@kingswaymo.com. You can find it on our website too, kingswaymo.com. Anyway, what I've heard from Old Testament scholar John Walton about the Old Testament, and he studies the Old Testament, but also ancient Near East cultures. So all the ancient people of Israel and all the people around them, because they share a lot of similar words, similar ideas.
Yep.
That's where you get ideas like some of the stuff about God written in the Old Testament is written that way to contradict Baal and the Ugarit people and some other people and their false gods. It's like it's written truly, but also antagonistically. Like, I'm going to use your language in an opposite way to show that you're stupid. And so to know both. Anyway, so he talks about how across all ancient Near East cultures, legal code was not written to be applied strictly. It was written like a guideline, like a good and wise king in a fair situation would do this kind of thing. But what he says is that there are next to no examples of people citing those laws and then going out with the, like, doing those things. What am I trying to say? Citing those laws and then
Implementing
doing those,
them?
implementing them letter by letter. It's usually, if you want to be a good, fair law person, you read all this stuff and embody the heart of whatever.
Yeah, so you just case by case make the decisions based on the relationships, the opportunities, the vengeance, the actions of the other. You don't
and the
just
pool
black
of
and white
knowledge,
it.
the
You don't
pool
black
of
and white it.
wisdom that is the whatever. And so I feel like the Pharisees are actually applying a bunch of this stuff really strict, which breaks the norm
Yep.
of how these laws were used. To us, the word law, Torah means law, and the word law to us sounds like we have a lawyer in our church, and most of what he does is like look up specific statutes and try to apply them and argue for specifically applying whatever to whatever.
And we have different phrases that we use that even define like the law. So like we use this phrase called "to the letter" of the law.
Yeah.
And so what that means is like, you'll see it in like a lawyer movies or whatever, like we're going to punish you to the letter of the law. And it just meaning we're going to hold you to every little piece that you broke.
Yeah. And also we're going to do it as far as we can within the fence of what the law is.
Whatever it allows us to do, you're going to get the maximum sentence.
And so that is not the typical way that Old Testament legal code and ancient Near East legal code was
makes
written
sense
or
why
applied.
they had to implement more and more rules because it was a way of thinking, and they're trying to.
So it is
Interesting.
important, but a lot of people will bring up like, don't like if your son does something against somebody, then he needs to be stoned to death in public or whatever. It's not a lot of public stonings, and it's not because they're lazy about the law. It's because they have law officiants. I don't know what a better word would be. Judges, whatever, who read all that, take the wisdom from it, and then knowing the situation say this should be the punishment.
Yep.
And it's not always letter of the law. It's usually spirit of the law.
Yep.
But the Pharisees are going letter of the law. Maybe we haven't applied this as fervently as we should have, where the Sadducees are going either spirit of the law or tradition of the law. Like, that's not how we did it 50 years ago, so we're not going to change.
I didn't say this on Sunday, but one of the things I wished I would have said was how the 10 Commandments are both of these things as well. They're 5 and 5, or 4 and 5, or 6 and 4.
Kind of 4 and 6,
4 and
but
6,
also kind of 5 and 5.
Which, like, the first 4 are like God stuff, the last 6 are like neighbor stuff, and
the last 5 are don'ts.
Yeah, don'ts, exactly.
So number 5 is do this with other people, and then 6 or 10 is don't do this.
Don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. And I think it's been clear since the very beginning that the heart of that was not just avoid these things, but like have the best in mind for your neighbor. And the way to have the best in mind for your neighbor is to not do these things. And now Jesus is, and that's why this is new kingdom. And I love that you bring up the Old Testament. And I think it's really, really, really important when you read the Old Testament to remind yourself that it's not our job to read the Old Testament into the New Testament. It's our job to take Jesus and take it back to the Old Testament.
Yeah.
What God has done through Jesus reveals what was unclear in the Old Testament. What God did through Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and what he did through the nation of Israel and through Egypt and through the desert
Babylon.
and all this, and through Israel as a nation is revealed in Jesus. And so we don't try to figure it out on the way to Jesus. We actually get the opportunity to take Jesus and try to bring it back to what God is doing and using Jesus as the goal.
I'm hoping to have another. Once we finish this episode, we're going back to just kind of random stuff, first of the days, but also stuff that's appealing and important to us. One of the episodes that I think we're going to do is one on how to engage the arts, and it'll kind of also apply to how to engage the Old Testament. Because I just got back from this junior high camp, and there's like scripture memory time and stuff like that, which is great. But some of it is like memorize the 10 Commandments, memorize whatever, these random Psalms and these random verses from the Old Testament, whatever. And it's all good, but the 10 Commandments was worth a high point value. So I got all my kids doing it. And that brought up incredible questions.
I bet it did.
Because some kids had different translations.
Yep.
One said, don't take the Lord's name in vain. And another kid's Bible was like, don't cuss. And I was like,
wait a second.
Hold up. And kids were like, what is coveting and what's adultery? And explaining adultery to junior hires is hilarious.
That's hilarious.
But like it brought up really good questions that were like, yes, you're memorizing the 10 Commandments. But as you ask questions about it, I'm able to show, not that you can break all the 10 Commandments and like God loves that, but like the spirit behind each commandment.
Yes.
So
that's really fun. And I'm excited to, and I know we have a couple others that we're going to talk about, country club Christians versus Christians that are actually engaged and believing, not just, there's a new phenomenon right now. Richard Dawkins come out. There's a couple other conversations. Elon Musk, even.
I don't love Christianity, but I do love the Christmas carols.
Well, what's funny is both Dawkins and then Jordan Peterson interviewed Elon Musk this last week, and he basically said flat out, I love Jesus and I love Christianity, just don't believe it. But I wish everybody did it. And Jordan Peterson's like, okay. Like, he's like, so your culture? And he's like, yes. He's like, I think the world would be a better place if everybody did it. And you can watch Jordan Peterson and you're like, what? But it is funny how we can kind of get into that mentality. I'm excited to have that as well as a podcast. But here's the cool thing about the way this section ends.
Yeah, let's actually talk about
I think that when this section of Matthew ends, it is attached to everything, because I think there's 7 questions since chapter 20 or the end of 21, where Jesus is, again, asked and asked and asked, and then he teaches, asked and asked and asked, and then he teaches. And then this is the last section where I think he has the Sadducees and Pharisees kind of on their heels, not sure what's going to happen. And he basically comes back in and says, there's a reason why when you ask me and I reveal what's going on, that it has more authority than you think. How did David talk about the Messiah? Mm-hmm. And when he basically quotes a psalm, I think it's 110, and what he basically says is when David talks about the Messiah, he talks about him as Lord. And why would the King of Kings, in the sense of the physical kingdom of Israel, the uniting King of Israel that was the greatest king that Israel ever had, which they're hoping would come back again, which they just put palm branches down, and they are hoping that David, the reincarnate, the son of David, is coming back in. Why then did David not call this person his heir, but he called him Lord?
Yeah.
And they, meaning the Pharisees and the Sadducees, but mostly the Pharisees, had heard this for a very, very, very long time. And the Pharisees had to swallow this pill of realizing they probably had quoted David by saying this and had never put it together. And if Jesus is the Messiah, he is not just a prophet. He's not just an expert in the law. He's not just some rabbi. He's Lord. And at the end of that section, there's a point where he asks, why did David do this? And they don't respond, because if they responded, they would have to say, well, he would be the son of God, not just the son of David. And they don't say it. And it's almost like the moment where you can read their brains, if I'm in that place, where they're like, we're going to have to kill this guy. This is not, I'm not liking these answers, and he's speaking blasphemy. Well, he didn't say it, like we said earlier, but he definitely alluded to it. And but it is a cool way that Matthew, as the writer, is pulling you in and trying to help you realize that Jesus is trying to expose why these questions aren't working against him.
And this is a big point Matthew's been trying to make in his account of the gospel of Jesus, his account of the life of Jesus. We even talked about this on the first Sunday study hall about Matthew in the genealogy.
Yep.
Where there's one in Matthew and one in Luke's account of Jesus' life, genealogies in each. But the point of Matthew's, there's 14 and 14 and 14. And it goes, I think, like Adam to Abraham and Abraham to David and David to Jesus.
Yep.
And it doesn't mean that there were exactly, 52 or something.
Yeah, generations or whatever.
Generations. What it means is Jesus is in the lineage of Abraham and David. And it is not just saying he's in the line of these two people. It's saying, like Abraham, he is the true and better father of Israel. Like David, he's the true and better king. This is him doing it again.
Yep.
Saying David's the true king of Israel, and the next person will have to be very David-y in their rulership. They'll aspire to be like David. And Jesus is like, David aspires to be me.
Yeah.
David wishes he was me.
Yep.
Yeah. He couldn't even build the temple because his hands were bloody.
And I think it's beautiful because the very end of this section, it says they went away and never questioned him again.
Yeah.
They're like, nah.
Never asked a question.
Never asked a question. And which is just, it's so beautiful because then Jesus, I don't know if the crowd just is a different crowd or if it dissipates or if it's these guys just sit back and let him talk, but Jesus is going to throw down for the next chapter and a half. And it's basically his turn.
Yeah.
And he's declaring before that section, this is why I get to do this.
Yeah.
I'm Lord. And
I have the authority.
I have the authority to say these things. And so, And their woes, which I know to our language, I don't ever go like, oh, woe, children, how dare you? Like, but at that time, it was warning or watch out or you wicked people. And a combination of all that, but it's also like a feeling of compassion and like oh, you've messed up so bad. It'd be the equivalent maybe of a parent going, I'm not mad, I'm just super disappointed. I'm really disappointed. And honestly, this makes me so sad and so broken.
It's like that, but a little more urgency.
Yeah.
Like you're about to jump out of a plane without a parachute. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm sad at you.
And this is really dangerous.
And I wish you would change.
It's like an intervention.
Yeah.
It's like an intervention.
Yeah.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah.
It's like an intervention because they're right on the edge. And it's funny, Jesus knows the ending and he still has to teach this stuff.
Yeah.
Which I think is crazy. Yeah. Like, why didn't he just go, you know what, it's your lost cause?
Yeah.
Like,
he could have given up.
But he didn't. And his heart is still for it. And we know this. There was a great number of people that are in that crowd that are going to be at Pentecost. There's a great number of people that are going to hear and then respond. And these are the words that Jesus is planting that hopefully grow into faith later. So even though in the moment they'll crucify him, later they'll call him Christ. And which is super, super fun. Well, I hope this section was encouraging. I know we bounced around. We had a little coffee, and I had some Propel over there, and I was like, I'm still coming off my pre-workout from my from the gym. But I hope I didn't talk too fast, but I hope you also got something out of it. If there was something that we said that was confusing or you didn't understand, you'd like to know more. If there was something you said that you really liked and you want to let us know and you want to know more about it or you found it encouraging, we always appreciate comments or little messages.
We threatened for a long time to do a Q&A episode with the questions you guys gave us. You gave us 0 questions.
Yeah, which was
so. Please,
questions are always great. And guess what? If you're a regular listener, we are watching the comments. So if there's something you want to see or hear, or if you want it to be anonymous, just send Ryan or I a message. Email.
If you listen to this a year from the time we recorded it, still send us a question.
Yeah, we
still want to know.
We love to have conversations and make these as relevant as possible to current questions that you may have.
Yeah.
And for those that are listening, thank you so much. You can always hit the like button. That helps the algorithm, but it also helps us subscribe, leave a review. If you're while listening on a podcast app, that also helps as well. We want this to be something that obviously is encouraging to Kingsway and the people here. It's a way to connect with you, for you to get to know us, to be just learners like we are and love to do it. But we want this to be a resource that you can use with family and friends or your spouse or with your kids, something that might spark a conversation or create an opportunity to go deeper in something that you didn't understand or want to know more. So, hey, as always, have a great and glorious day in the Lord. We'll see you next time.
See ya.